one of the characteristics of Western society is that there is no collective ethos. There is no collective group people can belong to actually want to defend. And we're then sort of funneled into these isolated, individualistic measures so that we are only concerned with our own self-gratification. And this is a spiritual death. Porn dehumanizes because you're sitting there gratifying yourself due to images of other people fornicating. And it dehumanizes them because it strips them away of their dignity. Again, well, they voluntarily did it, but then people who watch, we then participate in that dehumanization process, and we dehumanize ourselves by masturbating to screens and videos of other people engaging in sexual intercourse. But this idea of self-gratification and the worship of oneself is ultimately satanic, because that is what Lucifer, Satan, does. He wants to be worshipped. He worships himself, and we see this perpetuated in our society where people are worshiping themselves, and the worship of your own sexual gratification is such an easy way to get those erotic sexual energies moving in that direction.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
I want to talk a little bit about the death of intimacy, because that's going to be a central characteristic when we start looking at porn addiction and the utilization of these robot girlfriends. Now they're coming with AI software, and also now with your app. And so I call this the death of intimacy, because what is intimacy? And intimacy actually isn't about physical closeness or proximity to somebody. And therefore, intimacy is not necessarily about having sex with somebody. Intimacy is about the exchange of inner realities and building bonds. It can be romantic, obviously, but you can have intimate relationships with your close friends, with your family. And so intimacy is built on characteristics such as honesty, communication, caring, and usually a sort of selflessness. And when we talk about selflessness, this is going to be the characteristics about the gratification of one's personal sexual pleasure is going to be indicative of why we're going to see people actually be in favor of some of these sex bots. Because as I said, and I'm going to finish with this, if the point of sex is only personal gratification, the machines are going to win. But if sex and intimate relationships have a deeper spiritual meaning, well, then the utilization of these machines is actually a dehumanization and moving us more towards an animalistic, machine-like relationship with sex itself. And so I'm going to call this a sort of satanic isolation, because there's multiple articles, even leftist articles I have, where they're talking about how porn actually shrinks your brain, limits your neofrontal cortex, creates a sort of juvenile mental state, but also leads to isolation in multiple different regards. And so Satan, as we've talked about before, whether it be the COOF, whether it be the lockdowns, he wants us to be isolated. An essential characteristic, especially of our Orthodox faith, is community. It's communication, integral, honest communication, and communion with others, face-to-face, persons made in the image of God. And so getting us to actually coom inside of these robots, which we're going to be looking at extensively later in this stream, this is about a sort of satanic inversion of some of the most intimate and precious parts of our lives, and getting us to form again, sexual gratifying relationships with machines, and therefore not needing other people to have these intimate relationships. So the spiritual death that comes from this is tied with the obsession of self-gratification. We've done streams on narcissism. We've looked at, again, these characteristics of self-absorption throughout our society. We've talked about consumerism, or in this case, for this stream, coomerism, being a point in which one of the characteristics of Western society is that there is no collective ethos. There is no collective group people can belong to actually want to defend. And we're then sort of funneled into these isolated, individualistic measures so that we are only concerned with our own self-gratification. And this is a spiritual death, because spirituality, honor, this has to do with having principles and values that transcend myself, but then are caring for other people. And so the phenomenon that we're seeing in regards to this self-isolation is both societal and individual. We've talked about how, and again, we promote marriages, sex within marriage, not promiscuous sex, but just some of the sociological literature that's come out has highlighted that people are having less and less intimate relationships. It's harder and harder for young men to find marriageable partners to actually have relationships with. And so this isolation phenomenon, it's not just limited to what we call incels, involuntary celibates, of which some of the problematic dimensions of our society aren't their fault, but the pornography and the utilization of technology to gratify oneself furthers and catalyzes the isolation process that this stuff enables. And so the dehumanization of sex and orgasms is going to be the central characteristic here, because porn dehumanizes. And so porn dehumanizes as Saint, or as, well, in the Russian church, saint, but as Blessed Father Seraphim Rose says, pornography is the devil's iconography. And we've talked about this with Father Turbo as well. And so porn dehumanizes because you're sitting there gratifying yourself due to images of other people fornicating. And it dehumanizes them because it strips them away of their dignity. Again, well, they voluntarily did it, but then people who watch, we then participate in that dehumanization process, and we dehumanize ourselves by masturbating to screens and videos of other people engaging in sexual intercourse. Sex with a screen is dehumanization. Sex with a fantasy. So many people, in regards to this pornography, in regards to porn addiction, we'll see that people have to go into deeper and deeper and more intense forms of pornography to stimulate themselves, because they become so desensitized to eroticism, generally speaking. And so you look at all these busts on pedos in our society. Do you think these pedos watch porn? Absolutely, all of them. And that's why they're able to get to the point, if you saw what happened in Las Vegas, where 10 homosexual men raped a young child, a toddler, in a bathroom. That how do we get to a society where people can engage in this stuff? And it has to do with the desensitization of sex, the dehumanization of sexual partners, and it leads to degeneracy across the board. And so sex with toys is the same thing, because some of the articles that are going to be talking about these sex robots highlight that, well, it's not that big a deal. We've been using sex toys for centuries, and this is a good thing, and this is an evolution. And one person's going to talk about, on the Joe Rogan podcast, we got a clip of a Greek American. Unfortunately, he certainly doesn't sound like he holds his Greek Orthodox faith anymore. But he's going to talk about how, well, some people are an advocate of these sex robots because it allows them to explore their sexuality, and so they can have homoerotic relationships with these dolls without feeling the stigma of society being gay. They can explore themselves. They can redefine who they are. They can find new ways of sexuality. What? This is tied with, again, people being obsessed with kinks and fetishes and moving into a sort of sexual fantasy that people live in. And of course, our society is filled with eroticism. You can't turn around in today's American society without seeing somebody who's half naked, whether just on the street or all the advertisements. Look at particular forms of music like hip hop and rap. Everything is about butt worship and twerking and, basically sexual signaling that we find in apes and gorillas and stuff like that. But sex with dolls is the natural and logical outcome of all this stuff. And sex bots are continued with this sort of self-absorption, because I'm going to show you an app where you can choose the eye color, the skin tone, if it's chubby, if it's fit, if it's skinny, how long its hair is. You can pick the ideal bot. And we're not going to be watching it today, but in the research, I found some dude, he had like 3 different sex bots. He's like, oh, well, here's my Asian, here's my blonde girl, and here's my Latina. What? But this idea of self-gratification and the worship of oneself is ultimately satanic, because that is what Lucifer, Satan, does. He wants to be worshiped. He worships himself. And we see this perpetuated in our society where people are worshiping themselves. And the worship of your own sexual gratification is such an easy way to get those erotic sexual energies moving in that direction. And so sex bots, you can totally customize them to your own desires. And you're having sex with an inanimate object. How far removed is a sex bot from necrophilia? I ask, I wonder. It's not too far. And so people are actually praising the idea that they're going to have sex with these inanimate objects. And I'm going to highlight again, when we look at, what's the movie? Hold on. Let me pull it up real quick. Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner 2049. In that movie, he himself is a sort of AI, and he's wanting to have this sort of emotional connection. And then he has like an AI girlfriend, a sort of hologram girlfriend. And there's a video that we'll probably watch today where this sex bot can be controlled remotely. This is a Japanese sex bot, and this guy has her washing a dish at the kitchen sink. And so you think about sexual gratification, the increased isolation in our society. How far away where a man says, well, the divorces, the courts are stacked against me, all true. Well, so many girls are so promiscuous, I can't trust them. They don't love me for him. Probably true. So I'm just going to get one of these sex dolls, because now with their AI programs, they can cook, they can clean, they can tell me how sweet I am. Again, we're going to see one guy who has one. He's like, oh yeah, I'm married and I have 2 kids, but I forget what he calls her, Karen or Natasha or something. She has 1,000 jokes programs in her AI software. And, she can tell me all types of stuff. And when my kids are here, I just turn her on family mode so she doesn't say anything erotic. He has a wife, and the wife's okay with this. What is going on? But you see this, you can see how this in the near future, men are going to actually depend on these sex dolls because they can provide, quote unquote, everything that an actual woman would do. And if, again, sex is only about sexual gratification, well, then, why not? Because for them, in these sort of debased, degenerate people, they have no ethical, moral basis for why it'd be wrong. Now, if we're a Christian, obviously not. Obviously, it's a sin to engage in this stuff. And we see how all of this leads to a lack of reproduction. And we're quite aware of the depopulation agenda that's at hand right now and getting people to engage in sterilized form of sex. It's happening. And so these sex bots, we think about artificial wombs, gene editing, transhumanism, brain implants like Neuralink. It's happening right before our eyes. And the fact that people are so okay with living a sexual life where they get to engage in all this different behavior, but it leads to no reproduction, it leads to no responsibility, it leads to the creation of no life, is such a bastardization of the gift that God gave us. Because sex is not bad in the right context. Sex between a husband and a wife is not bad. It's something to be celebrated. It's something to be enjoyed by people in the right circumstances in the right time. So sex bots are the important link then we must see between the transhumanist future that we're moving into and the state that we're at right now. You think that's a stretch, but it's not, because if you, and we're going to see some articles highlight, well, once the AI robot sex doll is able to experience emotions and it's self-aware and it's conscious, well, then, maybe it's going to decide it doesn't want to have sex. And then we get into ethical issues if we can force sex dolls to have sex because the AI software is so advanced that it says it's no longer interested. This is part of a cultural symptom that does not realize that the uniqueness of who we are as humans is tied to us having a soul being made in the image of God. I've talked about this before on all the streams I've done on transhumanism. No AI software, no data set, doesn't matter how large it can grab from, doesn't matter how advanced the artificial general intelligence is, it is not a sentient creature because it doesn't have a soul. And what's happening in this process is people are losing their souls and they're becoming more and more like the robots they want to have intercourse with. It's disgusting. And so replacing human intimacy with a machine, what is more demonic than that? Again, we're going to look at this stuff and people think, well, it's okay. You know, people are lonely. They need these. And I'm going to show you like the sex doll market. It has skyrocketed since 2020 because people are more isolated than they ever were before. And so without souls, machines will never actually be conscious, alive, or human. This is the total misnomer that the advocates of these things want to say. Well, right now it's just a doll, but maybe in 10 years it's going to be a real boy. No, it's not. It doesn't matter how advanced the AI program is. It's not going to be a real woman. It's not going to be a real man. And I have videos talking about women. This is not limited to men. I have an article from a woman in the UK who calls herself a robosexual and has a male robot doll that she sleeps with daily. And she is not interested in relationships with humans. I'm not kidding you guys. I'm going to show you this. So this is not limited to men, although the vast majority of men, the vast majority of buyers and consumers of these sex dolls are men. And one of the scary things, and shout out to Scotland for doing this. One guy was arrested. I have an article. He was the first man to be arrested for purchasing a child sex doll. And this is a real thing if you're not aware, that there is a whole industry online for people all over the world who can buy customized sex dolls that are children. I kid you not. And there's articles, I don't know if I have any lined up, but I saw some talking about, well, this is a good thing because people who have these predilections and these desires towards children, they can just use the dolls. And by using the dolls, then we can make sure that they won't harm anybody. But actually, there's other research that shows that's not the case, that people who engage in pornography of a certain type or engage in behavior with like a child sex doll, that's only going to further the likelihood that they're going to try to do it with a real child. And so this process is men and women losing their soul and becoming like the machines that they want to have coitus with. And so porn, sex box, and isolation. I've talked about how pornography addiction leads to social. So here's a few things. Social isolation. This is done by peer-reviewed studies. And this is done by people who are in favor of a lot of the leftist agenda, but they can't deny the research and looking at pornography addiction, social isolation, perverted forms of lust, corrupted worldviews that are totally focused on sexual gratification, brain rewiring. We have an article talking about how it actually shrinks your brain. Your neofrontal cortex becomes less activated. We have an article talking about how people become more juvenile the more pornography they watch. Once you gain one of these pornography addictions, the brain loses its ability for long-term gratification, delayed gratification, because again, we're worshiping our sexual gratification in any way that it comes. And so rewiring ED in men, I actually found a page. It's like a forum for quote unquote incels. And they're talking about how they're addicted to porn. They're talking about how they have ED, that they can't actually even get hard without, again, increased forms of strange pornography. And we have to also highlight the necessity of toys for women, because that is tied with all this stuff. So it's not just men, women who use toys to masturbate and, basically numb their clitoris because they use such intense toys now. And I have articles literally showing female toys that are at the extreme. And this is the same thing. These women are also dehumanizing themselves. And these women are also going to have the same problems. It's a rewiring of the brain. And they're not going to, we already know that the more sexual partners you have, that the harder it is to have pair bonding occur with women, which again, we're not in favor of sexual promiscuity, but it's certainly that pair bonding affects women more than it affects men in regards to the more partners you have. And so incels are already suffering from social isolation. And because they're isolated, naturally they're turning to the pornography, which actually naturally furthers their social isolation and furthers the anxiety they get when they try to engage real life women. And so porn lowers your sexual drive. It lowers your ability to set beneficial goals for yourself and have the ambition to accomplish them. It lowers your ability to deal with hard work or enjoy hard work. And it lowers your mental focus. People who have porn addictions and watch porn regularly cannot focus for extended periods of time as long. And it obviously lowers your testosterone and all those things that I just highlighted. Goal setting, sexual drive, well, ambition, hard work, mental focus, all those are tied with testosterone. The more testosterone you have, the more likely you're to engage in those activities. And so men who are obsessed with pornography are destroying themselves and their ability to actually be masculine men. And we've talked about the thirst traps, how this is a spiritual phenomenon, how men are giving away their masculinity because they can't control their sexual urges. And the sexual urge and testosterone and being able to retain your semen and not engage in certain activities, this is part of what allows you to become a man. And the qualities that a woman's looking for in a man is somebody who's able to set goals, somebody who is ambitious, somebody who does work hard, somebody who has a physical presence. And pornography is detrimental to all these different things. And so 70% of men are unattractive to women. This is part of the incel phenomenon. You guys know it. I know it. And unfortunately, the only way to reverse that is for men to become better versions of themselves. And we have to highlight that women are also totally culpable for the hookup culture. And the hookup culture and the sexual promiscuity and how these women totally inflate their desires. This has been demonstrated by the red pill and the manosphere, how these average looking women want men that make, 7 figures and they have their businesses. The entire what is called the sexual marketplace is totally skewed. And pornography, these sex dolls that are here and they're only going to become more realistic, hookup culture, sex toys, this is all leading to this problem of spiritual and sexual isolation. And we're seeing the cat lady phenomenon now. All these old hags that now they're in their 40s and they're in their 50s and they only had hot girl summer through their 20s and 30s. They never got married. They never settled down. They never found the man that they wanted to be with. And look where they're at. They're lonely and they're going to be that way. And so the detriments of hookup culture have been devastating. Birth control is part of that because hookup culture is catalyzed and facilitated by, birth control, condoms, various forms of, reproductive control. And so few men are going to be successful due to this hookup culture and actually finding the wives, marriageable women. And this has been a conversation. I don't know if you've seen recently online. There's been some tension between the Christ pill and the red pill, of which I'm going to be doing a stream on that topic in the very near future. Women have higher and higher body accounts. They can't actually pair bond. They can't actually be committed long-term to a man. And so more men are going to rely on porn because they don't want to face the rejection, and more men are going to fall victim to these sex dolls. And so providing a sort of overview of this entire conversation, I want to add that if sex is only about the increase of personal gratification, the machines will win. Sex has to be something deeper. Sex is a byproduct of a spiritual intimacy that is much deeper and uniquely human. And marriage is a sacrament of the church. Marriage is something to be celebrated. And sex within marriage is something that is beautiful. It's not something that is corrupted. It's not something that brings shame like the pornography and like the promiscuous sexual culture that's rampant in our society. And so if we just focus on how good our orgasms can be and what's the most intense sexual experience we can have, the machines are going to win. According to Elon Musk, they're already better than a human. And so more isolation comes with sex without humans. And that's exactly the satanic inversion that we're seeing in our society. And of course, the evil one wants that. He wants us to be more and more and more isolated. And it's coming. It's here. And so more incels, more sex bots, more promiscuous women, and less children. This is totally, that's how you can see it's evil. It's naturally leading to the depopulation of our planet. It's naturally leading to the detriment of reproduction. And that's also a white pill. Because if you and I, as Orthodox Christians, if we're able to control ourselves, if us Orthodox men are able to become the masculine versions that we're called to be in the image of God, if we're then through providence able to find the women who are looking for those types of men, and we're able to get married, and we're able to have children, and we're able to have large families, we win in the future. We win within a couple generations because we have the values of God. We have the uncreated energies of God, and the evil one wants us to become like machines. And so part of resisting the transhumanist agenda is building good, strong families and having children. And so men are depleting, and this is part of the sexual dimension of this. They're depleting their sexual energy into the void of an AI robot. They're losing their masculinity, and they're losing the sacredness of marriage. We know that there's a crisis in masculinity. We know that there's the meaning crisis, the masculinity crisis. We know that the government wants to limit testosterone. If you're a middle-aged man and you want to get on TRT, they want to make that more difficult. But if you're an 8-year-old girl and you want to get on TRT, they're going to make sure that the government pays for it. This is about satanic inversion. This is about corruption. This is about sterilization. This is about an attack on one of the most sacred things God gave us. He told us to procreate. And that's what this phenomenon is about. And so this is a satanic dehumanization of the most intimate and private area of our life, our sexual lives. And you think that these sex robots aren't going to be filled with various forms of spyware? You don't think the government's going to know what's going on? You don't think these are going to be able to be tapped by a central control? You don't think that the eyes of your sex robot aren't going to be cameras watching you, videotaping you? Again, total humiliation, the loss of your dignity, the loss of your integrity as a man. And so God can't use the gift he gave us for the sacred creation of life if we can't control our sexual urges. Because if we're only interested in our self-gratification, we cannot be a conduit for God because we've chosen death. We've chosen sterile sex. And so sex bots and pornography are an atrophy of our humanness and turn us into an animalistic, transhuman, androgynous machine. Because I'm telling you guys, the artificial wombs are here. The sex bots are here. The transhumanist agenda is here. The Neuralink is here. The gene editing, the CRISPR technology is here. This is an attack on the existence of the biological man that God created. This is a technological attack on the image of God. And sex and the creation of life is one of the most beautiful, and it's one of the last truly biological dimensions of our lives, is that women give birth to children. And we're all going to become, again, the people who fall victim to all this stuff, the people who are going to be okay with the transhumanist agenda, they are going to be androgynous. They are going to fall victim to it. And they're going to lose their humanness. They're going to lose the image of God. And they're become, again, just a void. You're going to see the darkness in their eyes. Because the light of our life, the light of us, comes from God, following Christ. And so we cannot give in. We must fight for our biological reality. And we must realize that sex is something deeper than self-gratification. It's about a spiritual and personal intimacy between men and women. Men and women. Every other form is a bastardization of the gift that God gave us.